Today is a very special day. We are going to be talking with an extraordinary woman who embodies what it means to be an activist. New York Attorney General Letitia James. She is a lifelong activist, public servant, and leader. A leader who right now has found herself at the forefront of the fight against the Trump administration and all the misdeeds and disregard for the rule of law and failures that are taking place at the federal level. So, Attorney General, please join us. It's my pleasure to have you here. We want to thank you so much for taking your time, your precious time, to spend this next hour with us and talk to us about the work that you're doing at the Attorney General's office here for all New Yorkers. We know you're working super hard, so this time is really valuable. I think even this week, it's only Wednesday and there's already been a couple of actions you have taken with the Trump administration and gotten some great results already. So I would love to start off, if you could talk to us a little bit about what role does the New York Attorney General play in being able to take action like the action that is needed now at this time in history with the Trump administration. And I know there's plenty of things from immigration to failures of COVID, to voter rights, to climate change, reproductive justice. There's so many things that you have worked on. We'd love to hear some of those things and talk to us a little bit more about your role.
Thank you, Sonia. And hello, women. It's an honor and a privilege to be a part of this conversation, particularly now. You know, when I ran for Attorney General, it was because of my love for the law, because I recognize the law can be both a sword and a shield. And I recognized that we would have some challenges with the federal government, but I had no idea that the vast majority of my time right now is focusing on defending the rights of New Yorkers and protecting them from this administration. My main responsibility as Attorney General is to protect the rights of New Yorkers. So when any company or entity or individual or even the federal government puts New Yorkers in harm's way or threatens their rights, I have an obligation and a duty, a sworn duty, to challenge these actions. And we have seen this federal government try to skirt the law to advance its own political agenda. Historically, the federal government has worked with states in a collaborative and a cooperative relationship. But unfortunately, this administration seeks to curtail the rights of sovereign states for basically its own political agenda. We've seen countless occasions where this administration has basically taken a hostile approach to immigrants, to women, to our environment, and the list goes on and on and on, to people of color. This administration is actively pursuing an agenda that hurts our communities and hurts vulnerable and marginalized communities in particular. And that's not something that I can sit by and tolerate. As you know, my entire career, from serving as a public defender, as a former city council member, as the public advocate, and now as the Attorney General, I've been focused on one thing and one thing only, and that is simple justice for all, and making sure that all voices are heard and that everyone is treated fairly, and that we provide services to those individuals, unfortunately, who are locked out of the sunshine of opportunity. You know, on Monday, we filed a lawsuit to stop this administration in their attempts to, again, roll back the Affordable Care Act, known as Obamacare. We've been defending the Obamacare, and they basically wanted to roll back those protections against the LGBT community. They wanted basically to legalize discrimination against the LGBT community in the Affordable Cares Act bill, and against women who seek reproductive care, basically a comprehensive blanket immunity to organizations who do not want to provide reproductive care to women, to English language learners, and also to the disabled. And we have filed lawsuit after lawsuit against this administration, again, protecting healthcare, the environment, LGBTQ rights, women's access to reproductive rights, not only in New York, but across this nation. And we have been successful in that. Labor protections, you name it, our office has been involved in the immigration space. We have been involved, and we're going to continue to be involved. So it's such a time as this that the Office of Attorney General, again, has stood up for the rights of not only New Yorkers, but for all Americans. And it's at such a time as this that the Attorney General's office has been injected with some activism. And it's such a time as this that the Office of Attorney General is leading, again, this nation and standing up to this administration, this hostile administration, an administration which unfortunately does not reflect our values, does not reflect who we are as Americans, and is a threat, an existential threat to all that we believe in.
Absolutely right. Existential threat, which makes me think about what is happening right now that we're all reading about in real time and watching on the news, the situation in Portland. You know, this, and, you know, your colleague in Oregon, the AG there, Ellen Rosenbaum, filed suit on Friday. We have a situation there. We have paramilitary forces coming in to the city in unmarked cars and non-identifiable military fatigues, detaining, abducting people, protesters. And, you know, Trump is doubling down on that. And, you know, the guy from Homeland Security, Chad Wolf, said Monday on Fox that we're not waiting for invitations from the states. We're gonna go in when we feel we want to go in. It's nervous. I mean, you know, what are your thoughts in terms of how do we protect New York if they want to come here? They've targeted already Chicago next. I mean, what are there avenues for you to pursue, or what are you thinking about that?
So let me just say that this president is a master manipulator. This president is someone who would like to distract Americans. He's a great distractor, and he is someone who traffics in false facts. And so I spoke to Ellen Rosenblum, my colleague in Portland. In fact, yesterday, a number of the Democratic attorney generals reached out to her to give her support. And the president did indicate that he was focusing on Illinois, but he also said New York. And this is not the first time that he has threatened military action against New York. Last time he retreated, and he indicated that he would send in troops again because of the quote unquote violence in the streets of New York. And his rationale, again, the legal authority is to protect federal buildings. But the law basically indicates that governors, it's really up to state. It's a state right. It's the right of a sovereign state to police its streets, its community, and its buildings. And so it all depends upon what's the rationale and the reasoning for sending in federal law enforcement actions. And so we have established, in anticipation of any action by this federal government, we have already established a working group. We are researching the law, the Insurrection Act, a number of other acts as to whether or not this administration can send in federal troops. Historically, federal troops have been sent in times of conflict, but usually it's at the invitation of the governor of the state of New York. And clearly Governor Cuomo has indicated that he's not interested in seeking help from the federal government, that our police force are in a position, obviously, to address the slight uptick in crime that we have seen here in New York City and across the state of New York. In addition to that, I will guard the rights of protesters to engage in peaceful protest. It is a right which is embodied, incorporated in our Constitution, the First Amendment, and I will protect and guard that right for individuals to protest and to petition their government. That is my responsibility, and that's what I will do. But more importantly, I think it's important that we listen to these protesters. This is a defining moment in the history of our country. And it's important that we listen to those individuals who are marching in the streets of New York City. They want change. And this is like the second iteration of the civil rights movement as they stand up for the lives of Black people and as they stand up and demand change in policing in our state and across the nation.
You're so right. Not an invitation, and then no cooperation or collaboration with the local authorities, which is, just everything that we feared about Donald Trump and his tyrannical tendencies. On protesters, can we talk a little bit about here locally in New York City? I mean, you were tasked with investigating and the interactions between protesters and the NYPD. And I understand that you have recommendations. Can you talk to us a little bit about those recommendations on how you see police reform moving forward?
So let me just say that, some people, believe that this is an attack on the police force. I am not anti-police, by no means. If anyone knows my history, I worked with the police on body cameras. I worked with the police on ShotSpotter. In fact, I was the first city council member to come out in support of ShotSpotter and had researched it before it came to New York. I was the first city council member to provide cameras in public housing to increase lighting in hotspots. I was a plaintiff, yes, in the stop and frisk litigation against the police force because of its abuse of individuals in the city of New York. So I have been a supporter of the police, but I also have been a critic. And I have attended a number of their funerals, and I pray for them each and every day. But what I heard during the time that I conducted a hearing, 3 days of hearings, where we heard from over 100 protesters, was a stark contrast to the testimony of Police Commissioner Shea, who indicated and testified that he didn't see, for the most part, anything wrong with the conduct of the police. So it's important, one, that we democratize the police force. They're the only agency in the city of New York which basically sets their own rules, and they do it in the darkness of night. They're the only agency where one individual, the police commissioner, unilaterally has say and has the final say with respect to discipline. And last but not least, the police force obviously is not accountable. There's no transparency to the general public. So I want more public input. I want more transparency, and I want to democratize the police force in the city of New York. And so what does that mean? That means establishing a commission, as opposed to just the police force, a publicly appointed commission, which will have jurisdiction over the NYPD, the ability to hire and fire the police commissioner, the ability, obviously, to make recommendations with respect to who should be disciplined in the city of New York. We would like an independent inspector general who doesn't report to the police commissioner, but reports to the mayor of the city of New York. We want to strengthen CCRB. We want to make sure that there is a list, and I've been advocating this for a long time, a list of a warning list of individuals, of police officers who engage in a pattern and practice of abuse, who have a number of CCRB complaints against them, whose cases have been dismissed for violations of human rights. We need to have a warning system of police officers who should be disciplined and or removed from the police force and or retrained. And we need to diversify the police force. The higher ranks of the police force are mostly white, but the rank and file are mostly individuals of color. It's really critically important, again, that we impose, that we implement, that we think bold, that we think out of the box with regards to recommendations. This is a preliminary report. A final report will come out shortly with respect to the individual complaints that we received. The police force kettling protesters, meaning they surrounded them and then oftentimes moved in to arrest them and or abuse them. We need to talk about the individual instances of police abuse that we witnessed that were captured on camera. We need to talk about those officers who took out their guns, who used tear gas, and even in one particular instance where an individual showed or displayed a white nationalist sign. Those are some of the instances that we are investigating, and that will be included in our final report. The protests are ongoing, and so our investigation is ongoing. But we need to have systematic reform in the police department if we are to rebuild the trust which has been lost in the city of New York, and I would argue throughout the state of New York and across our nation. And we need to, lastly, decriminalize some of these minor offenses. There are too many offenses where the police officers interact. They're poorly trained to interact in these interactions. Whenever there's a crisis, they should not be in a position to deal with situations where they are poorly trained. I'm thinking specifically with regards to dealing with individuals who are mentally ill, the homeless. Those types of interactions should be up to trained professionals. And so that's what we should look at here in the city of New York. And I would hope that our leaders, again, review my preliminary report and adopt some of these recommendations.
Well, we're so happy that you're on the case. Everything that you've said really resonates certainly with what we have found, and certainly some of the comments from the audience are very much glad that you're on the case, and even asking, is there a way for members and activists to be involved or support you in these efforts?
Sure. You know, we will be making efforts again to have a conversation with members of the city council, with members of the state legislature. I urge everyone to go onto my website and to download the report and review it. This is a preliminary report, as I mentioned earlier. There's also there will be a final report that will be coming out soon, and I urge you to read that as well. I also want to say that we also need to look at the possibility of certifying police officers and/or licensing them. It's an issue that they are putting forth in New Jersey, where officers should be licensed and properly trained. We also should look at the training. Well, police officers in New York City only receive 6 months of training. There are some professions where individuals are trained for a longer period of time and they receive a certificate. We really need to look at expanding and extending the training for police officers and even licensing them or certifying them and decertifying them if they engage in misconduct. So I urge all of your listeners, all of your followers to read the preliminary report and to urge your city council member and or your state legislature to adopt some of these recommendations. There has been some pushback, but whenever you put forth bold change, there's going to be some pushback, but this is the time for systematic change. We could not continue to move forward with the status quo. It is unacceptable because these events are happening over and over again. And clearly, the police commissioner should not have sole jurisdiction, sole responsibility of disciplining officers, of hiring and firing them. That is just totally unacceptable. We need to strengthen CCRB. We need to make sure that we have a watch list of officers who engage in misconduct. We need to decertify. And we need to make sure that the police force, again, reflects the city of New York in terms of its diversity.
Absolutely. There's other areas of reform. One of the things that Now New York has really worked on is the issue of sexual assault response. I mean, so much of what you're saying really doesn't even apply to the Special Victims Division. We find we spent 3 years working with survivors and really looking at their cases and how they were not investigated thoroughly enough, the investigators not being trained well enough, not having the trauma-informed training and the sensitivity training that are a little more nuanced, like you're talking about with dealing with homeless populations and vulnerable populations. And sometimes it's like, wow, is this 1950?
Right.
Some of the responses and treatment that survivors are seeing. So we just invite you. We would love to meet with you and your team to talk to you about our findings and our efforts to push forward the NYPD to have a best in nation special victims department. There is so much that they're falling short on that could be better. And this would be a great additional area of police reform that maybe that you could weigh in on and recommendations.
Just the training, for instance, to what extent are they trained with regards to dealing with sexual abuse? I don't know. we, again, really need to look at and examine their training manuals. In their training manuals, they basically teach these cadets that it's a us versus them mentality, which is totally unacceptable. We also need to establish a codified use of force, which is statewide. I think that is really critically important. And yes, there is a group of states attorney general. We meet often. There's a Democratic attorney general organization where we meet every Tuesday. And then there's an attorney general organization of all attorney generals, both red and blue. And we are working together as well. And yes, we need to also look at police unions and their contracts to see to what extent do they stand in the way of progress and of reform. They have been hostile to reform. It's important that they understand that police work for the general public. We pay their salary, and therefore there should be some accountability, some transparency, and some public input into their practices.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you think that this could translate into, I know throughout the state there are, law enforcement is organized in different ways. There's sheriff's departments and such. Are you hearing that in other parts of the state that there are issues as well? First I want to thank the state legislature. As you know, I was in the forefront of body cameras, and the state legislature, as part of their reform bill, just passed a bill which would expand body cameras to state police. But there are still municipalities throughout the state of New York which do not have body cameras, Long Island, for instance. And there have been some police forces which have been hostile to body cameras. And I believe, again, in body cameras because it basically objectifies police interaction. And it's really critically important that we have body cameras. I want to thank the city council and the state legislature for banning chokeholds, but we need a standardized use of force. And that is what is really critically important. And to what extent, again, is our cadets are trained on a standardized use of force in the state of New York. And then we really need to look at qualified immunity. So there's so much more that we can do working with your organization. Again, I don't pretend to have all of the answers, but these are some of the issues that my office has been focusing on, and I look to work with you to expand the list of recommendations as we go forward to save the lives of individuals, particularly as I am seeing those who are suffering from mental illness. When individuals are suffering from mental illness, death should not be the response, should not be the final response. And those, again, who are on drugs, it's unfortunate, but it's what I see again is it results in death because police officers are poorly trained to deal with those who are suffering from mental illness and those who are suffering from drugs and those who are homeless. You're right. This is a second major movement, civil rights movement, and I believe with leaders like you, we're going to really make progress. We just have to win this election in November.
Well, yeah, that is so critically important. But democracy is on the ballot, and everyone, and particularly in those battleground states. I don't know about you, but I'm going to vote early and get on a bus and go to a battleground state and help out again, because we've got to end and we've got to return to normalcy. So I know this is a not-for-profit and nonpartisan, but vote, and vote for the other guy.
No, absolutely. This is part of our Grab Trump by the Ballot campaign.
Yes.
So we're all in.
We are all in.
So turning from the issue of law enforcement and such, I mean, also your office, as you mentioned, also has jurisdiction over consumer affairs and companies yes. that might be either defrauding or treating its employees badly. Are there any cases that you would like to talk about now? I know that there's been some work in terms of COVID-19 and consumer issues.
Yeah, we've been dealing with, during COVID-19, we've seen a lot of price gouging, a significant number of cases related to price gouging, consumer fraud individuals who are selling products, essential products, above and beyond what they normally cost. We've been seeing individuals both online and in person sell fake and fraudulent treatments for COVID, lotions, potions, toothpaste, individuals who believe that they've got a cure or a treatment. It's just not the case at all. We've been dealing with individuals who want to know whether or not they are essential or not. We've been working with the governor with regards to a number of executive orders. We've been just dealing with individuals who are socially isolated, and obviously individuals who are suffering from a little depression during this period of isolation and a time when we've got to retreat to our homes. So we've been very, very busy. We've been working remotely, but we've been responding nonetheless, and our productivity is up. And we've been also at the same time dealing with consumer issues and consumer fraud issues, also dealing with the census case. As you know, we successfully fought the Trump administration before the Supreme Court, but as you know, he just recently announced an order just yesterday where when it comes to reapportionment, he does not want to include in those numbers undocumented immigrants. So here we are, a census 2. And we have a task force, and we will be responding in kind. My office will be responding with other Democratic attorney generals to defend this basic notion that everyone matters and therefore everyone counts. And reapportionment, as you know, is absolutely critical, and it's tied to how much resources we get from the state of New York, from the federal government. And it's tied also to the number of representatives that we have in Congress. We can ill afford to remove undocumented immigrants from the census count. Our census numbers right now, our response rate right now in New York is relatively low. So I'm reminding all of your members, please tell your friends, get on your networks, social media, fill out the census. And please, if your organization could file an amicus when we file our action against this administration, as we battle him once again on the census. He's just feeding red meat to his base. He is totally, again, hostile to immigrants, but we're gonna stand up just like we won the first census case. We're gonna win this case again. We won also in the Supreme Court, again, defending Dreamers, the DACA case. I'm really happy about that. We won in the courts again with ICE in the courts. Law enforcement should not be in our court system, basically arresting undocumented immigrants who go to court to seek orders of protection and are witnesses in crimes. It's just really unacceptable. So those are some of the things. And again, filing amicus all across this nation and leading attorney generals and standing up for a woman's right to choose. That's what we've been involved in, if not, and in filing more environmental cases in this country than any other attorney general.
Yes, you certainly have been busy. I have a question from Jill, who's asking, are there any prohibitions in New York to bringing a case against Trump personally while he is in office?
Personally?
Yes.
No, there's no prohibition against you personally. The question is whether or not you can establish what they call standing, which is a legal term. And in order to challenge him, you've got to establish some sort of harm. So as the Attorney General, I usually establish harm because of the harm that he poses to citizens. If you can establish harm, direct harm, then you can establish standing, and then you can challenge this administration as well. And so I urge everyone, if you do not want to file an individual case, what you can do is file an amicus brief with an organization or individually. As you know, most recently, we were prepared to sue this administration when he told international students who were studying here in New York that unless the class was in person, that individuals who were taking online classes, and if you were an international student, you would have to leave this country. He backed down from that. Harvard filed a suit. MIT filed a suit. We filed a suit. My other colleagues across the country filed suit, and ultimately he backed down primarily because of the economic impact that that would have had on these colleges. They reached out to him, but he knew and he realized, and I'm hoping that Attorney General Barr advised him that there was no way that he could have won that lawsuit. And I'm glad that he changed his mind. But you know, these continued attacks against New York State and against its residents, whether or not they're documented or not, we're going to stand up and defend their rights because we are facing a hostile government. And again, it's his administration and his values are totally inconsistent to what I believe in and what I cherish. And I'm going to use the law as a sword to protect vulnerable and marginalized populations. It's my duty and it's my honor, and it's something that I enjoy.
And it's something that you have always done. You've been very consistent on that. And it's one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, you know, what motivates you when you get up? I know you must have some very early mornings that run late into the night. You know, what drives you? And I believe it's what you just said, but you know, your life has changed dramatically since you become Attorney General of New York.
Well, you know, it's funny. I don't want my life to change. You know, that's why, you know, they've got all of these police around me, and I usually go out the back door. I gotta walk in my neighborhood by myself. I've got to connect with people. I've got to sit down with them and talk to them and learn things on the ground. I don't want to be surrounded by police. I don't want to be chauffeured around in a big SUV. I want to be with people. And if you take me from that, then that's going to, I lose my core, my moral core, my moral compass. I need that more than anything. That's where I get my energy. I don't come from much. I come from humble beginnings. And I'm reminded of the struggles of my parents. And I'm reminded of the struggles of all Americans, Black and white, Asian, Latino, it really doesn't matter. Individuals who are struggling right now as a result of COVID-19, people who are burying their loved ones, people who have lost their jobs, people who are standing right now in food pantries waiting to get food. You know, you gotta raise your voice. You gotta fight back. You gotta stand up. That's what motivates me. That's my reason for living, my raison d'etre. And that's why I ran for the Attorney General. And that's why it's an honor and a privilege. And I thank all of those who thought it wise to put me in this place. And I appreciate it.
Absolutely. You know, one of the things that we've been having comments on the thread here is another tragedy that just recently happened, and that was the attack on federal Judge Esther Salas and her family, in which her son died and her husband's in the hospital. I don't know what to make of it. I want to shout from the rooftop. You know, this individual, I realize he had some serious problems, but the fact that there's platforms out there where he could not only spew his misogynistic, violent themes and rhetoric and have people agreeing with him, you know, that thread of misogyny that still exists. I don't know, what are we supposed to do with that? I think of this woman, the first Latina in this position, who had power and influence, and this is what she's met with. She's met with utter violence in her home and her child being killed. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, or if
Well, first, my thoughts and my prayers are with her, the loss of her son. I'm praying for the recovery of her husband. You know, I did not know Judge Salas, but obviously, you know, I recognize that she was the first Latina in New Jersey, a federal court judge, and that's an honor and a distinction. And for this anti-feminist nut, this individual to like prey upon her and her family, it's just unconscionable. But He's not alone, I don't think. There are probably
No.
others out there.
Yeah,
So
and
we all
actually,
have to be vigilant.
a question from Julia is there any way to investigate organized anti-feminist men's rights violence and these hate crimes? And she's making the point too of the the connection of gun violence and
Right.
misogyny.
So it's interesting because I have a hate crimes unit, and we are investigating all types of hate. We were focused on initially anti-Semitic acts, and then acts against the Asian community in light of COVID-19, and now focusing on acts against women. And we are seeing an increase in gun purchases, not only in New York, but all across this nation. When I travel upstate and even on the island, you will see lines of individuals purchasing guns legally. And I believe that it's directly tied to an increase in gun violence that we are seeing in urban centers. But this hate crimes against women are real, and this guy acted on it. And so we will continue to look at it and examine and see if there are organized groups of anti-feminist hate groups focused on women, and whether or not they're tied to white nationalist groups and other groups in the state of New York. And again, we have a hotline for anyone who has information with respect to any hate group in the state of New York.
Excellent, excellent. I have a question from Donna, who's asking, all of the everything happening at the Southern District and previously at the Eastern District, with the firing of Berman and such. How does that impact your work?
Well, we coordinate with Justice from time to time. I am in touch with the Eastern District, with the Southern District. Sometimes we work on cases, other times we do our own individual cases. We are following, again, what Justice is doing, but we're not relying upon Justice at this point in time. Again, we are focusing on our power, our authority as a sovereign state. And in the event that we do not have the authority, we often turn to the governor of the state of New York to issue an executive order to provide us with that authority. And he can do that. And but at this point in time, we have not seen any issues that concern us. But at a time when we are seeing them retreat from their traditional roads, such as in the voting rights space, in the hate crime space, in the space related to criminal justice, we are stepping up again with the Democratic attorney generals across the state. In fact, the Attorney General of Illinois, Attorney General Kwame Raoul, and I wrote a letter to Congress, and we are asking Congress to include in the next stimulus package the ability for state attorney generals to investigate pattern and practice cases related to voting rights and to civil rights. The House passed the bill, which gave us that right. We're now hoping that the Senate would incorporate that as well, because as you know, justice is not in the business right now of protecting vulnerable populations. And so it's up to state attorney generals to engage in pattern and practice cases. Some argue, and I argue, that we have that right under parens patriae, which is basically the power to serve over our individual states. But it would be great if that could be codified in federal law. And we're hoping that the United States Senate would see fit to provide us with that power and with that authority. So we are continuing to lobby members of the Senate.
Well, we will join you on that. And that's one of the questions that I had for you, and was only reinforced by the poll in the beginning, which really showed that really being people's number one concern at this point, with the election being now, it's either today 100 days or in the next coming days, it's 100 days away. So I have another consumer question. I'm trying to make sure that I get to everybody's questions, so sorry if I'm going back and forth. But Mackie is pointing out that there's a lot of price gouging going on online. So she's curious about who is responsible for investigating that. Is it the state where the consumer lives or where the seller is headquartered?
So oftentimes we've been speaking to social media platforms, and we have been successful in getting some websites removed or removed from their particular platform. So if in fact you have an individual complaint, if they're selling items and or products to residents of the state of New York, regardless of where they live, we've got jurisdiction. So please reach out to our office, call our office, file a complaint, and we will look into it. We've got offices all over the state of New York. I've got 16 offices from the border near Canada all the way to Long Island. We have an office in Nassau and Suffolk. We've got an office in Manhattan, one in Brooklyn, one in Harlem, one in Westchester, Poughkeepsie. The list goes on and on and on. So please reach out to our office, and we will look into that matter.
And this is a related question from Ruth. Do you know what's being done to protect our election system from foreign interference? And I would add to that even protecting for the mail-in balloting. I mean, it hasn't gone as well as we had hoped for this past primary.
It went horribly wrong, and part of it was because of a confusion over whether or not the ballots should be, when they were postmarked and should they be postmarked, whether or not they should be treated as business class, which does not require a postmark. It's my understanding that the legislature is meeting this week. It's my understanding that they're going to be taking up a bill to try to correct and fix that. But voter suppression obviously is real. The changing of poll sites is real. The fact that COVID-19 complicates matters. But we do have early voting in the state of New York. And so the state legislature had a hearing just 2 days ago with respect to the problems that we all experienced in this past primary. They also had a hearing with regards to the Voting Rights Act. As you know, Section 3 of the Voting Rights Act, which would give the United States, which would give justice the ability to review any changes in the law, and particularly in its impact on voting rights districts, was gutted. The state legislature would like to give that authority to my office. That bill is currently pending in the state legislature. But for foreign influence, I do know that Congress is looking at it. And I do know that there have been a number of hearings, but we are, again, focused on the state of New York. We've got limited jurisdiction in that particular area. But we are working with legislature and working with the New York delegation to look at the larger issue of foreign influence into our voting process.
There surely is no shortage of critical issues to work on right now.
And let me also say, we also need to take a moment just to thank Congressmember John Lewis for all that he did. The voting rights bill, which is pending in Washington, was sponsored by Congressmember John Lewis. We need to make sure that that bill is passed, that the United States Senate passes that bill, which would restore protection to voting rights district. We need to make sure that the Edmund Pettus Bridge is also renamed after John Lewis. Edmund Pettus was a Confederate. He was the leader in the Ku Klux Klan. That bill where John Lewis got his skull cracked marching over for the voting rights should be renamed in his honor. But we should also, our first priority is making sure the voting rights bill that he sponsored in the House, which passed in the House, be passed in the United States Senate. That's the best way to honor his legacy.
Thank you so much for mentioning those two efforts and putting that front and center for all. Those certainly would help with so much healing and certainly be so satisfying to see that happen. Attorney General James, we're so thankful for you to join us today. I've learned so much. I'm inspired. I've got actions to take moving forward. And we're so very grateful. And it's been a pleasure to work with you. I hope everybody, I want everybody to know that you have been such a leader, certainly on women's rights and reproductive rights and pay equity. I mean, there's just so many different times and different issues that when we have called you, you have been there. You have stood with us. whether it's City Hall, whether it's in the rain or the snow, you have been out there with us. You always make these things a priority, and more importantly, you're effective. You get things done. And, in times like this, it's really leaders like you that just are able to make us appreciate and relax that there is a balance. There is a balance in the world and in leadership, and we'll make it through it.
We're gonna make it through. We're gonna get on the other side of the mountain. We're gonna get through this. My faith teaches me that this too shall pass. I want to also I understand, I saw this young woman who was involved in some litigation that we took against a construction company. As you know, we reached a settlement recently, $1.5 million for some women on Long Island as part of trade-off who were being sexually harassed on the construction site. I just saw one of their names. Congratulations, that was a great settlement. And lastly, let me just close by saying, in the words of the late John Lewis, let us all get in some good trouble. I look forward to getting in
Yes.
good trouble with you. Thank you. Equal pay for equal work, and get in good trouble. Thank you, Sonia.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, I'm going to turn it over now to my esteemed colleague, Jean Bukharish. She's going to tell you some of the actions that you can take. And please remember to visit our website if you need any help with any resources. Our Women's Justice Now has our resource center has all the information you need for any benefits and agencies that you may need to be in touch with. We are going to be out on the campaign trail as well, helping getting voters to the polls. We are doing phone banking, and remember, you never know exactly who is registered to vote in your circle. You think they are, and maybe they don't have everything in order. So check with everybody, so you make sure that everybody has an opportunity to vote in November. Here is Jean. I introduce you to her. Thanks so much, Jean.
Thanks, Sonia. And that's exactly what I was going to start with, is that there are 4 months and we can look at polls, but we don't want to get caught up watching the poll numbers and not doing everything we can to get people out to those polls for the election in November. So check with your friends. Now is the time to lay the groundwork for what's going to happen in November. We're up against potential and likely foreign interference. We're up against voter suppression across the country. And we're up against, voting during a pandemic. And what is that going to look like? And what are mail-in ballots going to look like? And so with all of these different potential issues and not knowing what's going to change from day to day, we just have to do everything we can to get as many people out as possible. So this is something we're going to continue to work on. We hope that you will sign up with us to phone bank for our women's rights candidates, to flip seats here in New York, but also we hope that you'll join the work that we're doing to reach out to voters, especially in those swing states. And so this is just a reminder to, we had a couple of other prior webinars about political persuasion and how to talk to different people. So anyone that's maybe more moderate or on the fence, we can use those tactics and reach out to our lists and our family members and the people in our lives. And the other two pieces of legislation that I just want to mention that are federal, that really go hand in hand with the conversation that we were having today. I know that a lot of what happens with how we reform police is going to happen at the local level, but there is a real call for national standards and a real need for national standards. And so the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act is really just sitting there. It was passed by the House and it's sitting in the Senate without movement. And I think our senators here and senators across the country need to hear from us about why this is important. I saw in the discussion, someone was mentioning, yes, we need a national police misconduct registry. We know in the cases of Eric Garner, that police officer that murdered Eric Garner had 4 abusive stops and searches on his record. Derek Chauvin, who murdered George Floyd, had 18 complaints against him. If we are not doing anything with these complaints and abuse, then we're not really going to prevent violence and unnecessary murder, especially of people of color in this country. So I urge you to make those calls for the Justice and Policing Act. And last, I'll just mention, because we're almost out of time, is with the HEROES Act, with this next big piece of legislation that's out there to support businesses and individuals during this COVID crisis. There's also important elements in there supporting survivors of sexual assault and supporting people who are facing domestic violence. And we know that domestic violence thrives in situations where there's secrecy, where people can be cut off from others. And certainly with our quarantine and everything that's happening, we know that home is not a safe place for everyone. And so we need to make sure that although there is some increased funding for domestic violence in this package, there isn't enough funding to help sexual assault service programs that are seeing a 40% increase in phone calls right now because of all the difficult times that people are facing. And also, there's no funding for culturally specific community-based organizations that provide services for victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. And we know that those community-based organizations are the ones that people can turn to. They'll have the language access needs and other culturally specific needs. They'll be able to address those specific needs in ways that other organizations cannot. So we hope that we'll send this information out in an email following, but I hope that you will make calls in support of expanding that funding. And last point, also in the HEROES Act is something we talked about today, which is that there's billions of dollars in there that would mandate mail-in voting and making that available across the country. And so we need to protect our election, and we need to make sure that measures to protect our November election are included in this next package. So those are the few areas where you can make calls right now. And we will be in touch with you about the opportunities to volunteer for candidates and for really making change this November and in the lead up to that. So I thank you all for being with us today. And I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Shannon. Thank you.